Joining us today to answer questions about how global developments affect our daily lives and the economies of countries in Europe and all over the world is Richard Wolff, Professor of Economics Emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and visiting professor at the New School University in New York. He's the host of the program Economic Update, produced by the nonprofit organization Democracy at Work, which he co-founded. He's the author of numerous books, including Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Understanding Capitalism, and his latest book is The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics and Itself. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
I'd like to start our questions and the interview and the discussion in contemporary America. In the beginning of this year, most of the media in the US reported that the US economy was strong and that all doubts of American citizens about whether the country was in decline were unfounded. Now, what is your opinion on this claim? And more importantly, how has the economic situation of the average American developed over the last 10 to 15 years?
Well, let me begin by giving this quotation, and you're quite right, that's what the media has been saying. Let me give you a response that such claims deserve. If you're really worried about the world thinking you're in decline, then the first question you ought to ask yourself is, why are they thinking that? Rather than being quite so busy in showing that they're all wrong to even think that you could be in decline. So let me begin as an American economist, which is what I am. I never dreamed in my life, and you can tell from my gray hair that I've been a professor a long time. I've been a student of the United States economy. I'm a product of the American educational system, and I've been a professor in it all my adult life. I never expected to see the level of decline I am now living through. And I can assure you that the people who understand this economy and are free to speak about it agree with me. We do not agree on why we have these problems, and we do not agree on how to get out of them. But we agree on the following sentence. This is the worst condition of the American economy in our lifetimes. And to give you an idea of who I mean understands what I'm saying, let me tell you that I'm a graduate of the elite universities here. I went to Harvard as an undergraduate, then I went to Stanford, and I finished my degree at Yale University. That is what passes for elite education here in the United States. My classmate at Yale, a young woman who got her PhD studying the same material I did, from the same professors I had, in the same room where I sat, is a woman named Janet Yellen. Okay? So I know what those people learned. I know how they think about economics, because it's exactly what I learned. It's what they've been teaching as professors, which many of them have been. And it's what I've been teaching when I haven't been wearing my critical hat. So I'm not the only one, not by a long shot. They all know that what I'm saying, why it has truth, but most of them are in positions where they cannot speak freely. For example, Janet Yellen is the Secretary of the Treasury. She has to say what the Biden administration wants the world to think about its situation. So she's forever telling Xi Jinping in China what he should do and what Vladimir Putin should do, and she's talking about the powerful United States. Does she actually think that? I don't think so. I don't know. I can't speak for her, but I can assure you that her thinking, I have more respect for her than to believe that, given what I know about her. Okay, about then the question of decline. Let me use a metaphor. If you have a physical sickness of some sort, you don't feel well, you're ill. You go to a doctor and you say to the doctor, please, I don't feel well, my leg hurts, my arm or whatever. And then the doctor does things with you. And now let's suppose what the doctor does is he takes the thermometer, puts it under your tongue, looks what your temperature is, says, oh, 98.6 Fahrenheit, 98.6, you're healthy, go home. My guess is if you're reasonably intelligent, you're going to go get a different doctor because this is not the one you want to stay with. Why? Because you're smart enough to know that doctors do blood tests, they do urine tests, they have a whole battery of machinery and testing to look at the different parts of your body. You can have a temperature that is saying you're healthy, but you could have urine that says you're not healthy. And then the job of the doctor is to weigh the different pieces of information to come up with a conclusion. Okay, the economist is exactly the same. You come and you say, here's an economy. An economy is an enormous thing. It's the production of food, clothing, shelter, the production of transportation, the communication of ideas and thoughts. It is unemployment, it is inflation, it is all these things. And the job of the economist is to look at all of them and give you a balanced assessment. Here are the things that are looking pretty good. Here are the things that are looking awful. Okay? So, for example, I'm going to use the United States now. The United States has certain strengths. It has discovered underneath its own soil immense reserves of oil and gas. This means it is not dependent on the international market as much as many other countries are who have to get some or all of their oil and gas by buying it from other countries. The United States, that's a strength the United States has. Here's a weakness, that the United States has got a powerful movement not to use oil and gas as the basis of your energy. And that movement is strong, that movement is broadly based, and that movement is not about to be turned around. So you've got a problem here. How are you going to use your oil and gas, which you kind of want to, but you can't, because you pollute everything, and there's a powerful movement when you do that against your doing that. Okay, that's not resolved, that issue. That is not a resolved issue in the United States. The oil companies wish it were resolved, but it isn't. Let me give you a second example, may make the case clearer. The spokespeople, like Janet Yellen for Mr. Biden, like to point to our unemployment rate, currently 3 to 4% of our labor force. By historical standards, that is low. And so you can say, which they do 10 times every day, here it is, a wonderful economy. Our unemployment rate is at a historically low level. All of that is true. The problem is, by itself, the number proves nothing, and it never did. Here is indications of why. For the last 40 years in the United States, we have seen a steady widening of the gap between the rich and the poor. It is staggering. I could tell you in detail about it, but you know it's happening in Europe, so my guess is you know already about this. But we have it very severe. You think you have it in Europe? We have it much more here. We have, I will give you just an absurd example. Yesterday, a small, unimportant law judge decided to tell Elon Musk and the Tesla Motor Company that they could not pay him the salary that they had agreed to pay him. The board of directors of Tesla had agreed to pay him for last year the sum of, get ready, 56 billion with a B, $56 billion. Okay, just to give you an idea, 1 year's salary, 1 year, that's more money than the total value today, as I'm speaking to you, of the General Motors Corporation, which is the largest automobile company in the United States. Right? What is going on that you can be in a conversation and give one person for 1 year an amount of salary that is larger than one of the biggest corporations in your country? It's lunacy. It's so crazy. By the way, it's typical and normal, but it is so crazy that the judge said, you can't do that. And as a result, Mr. Musk not only is appealing the decision, but has decided he's going to move his corporation's documents from the state of Delaware, which is where this decision was made, to the state of Texas, where he has been invited by the governor because they will give him what the state of Delaware. We are in a country which is competing to service the richest possible people to no limit at all. Meanwhile, we have cut back on social programs across the board because there, ready, isn't enough money. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. We have a raging increase in the United States right now of a problem of syphilis. That's a sexually transmitted disease. Very serious. It can be treated. We know how to treat it. But if you don't treat it, it can kill you. It can kill people. Okay, we have an explosion of syphilis. Why? Well, yeah, of course not. Of course not. Of course not. So we have this explosion of syphilis, and I started looking into it, and I discovered that last year it was decided, when there was a dispute between the Republicans and the Democrats, that in which the Republicans threatened to shut down the government, they had to negotiate. You may remember at the last minute, they came to an agreement. Yeah, well, what people never pay attention to is the little deals that are made at the end to get the agreement. And one of the deals was the conservative politicians from the American South and Midwest, what we call MAGA land or Trump territory, they got the cancellation of a small program that hired people to go into poor neighborhoods to explain to people how they could get a cost-free syphilis care if they contracted syphilis. And so they paid young Black women and young Black men to go around Black neighborhoods teaching people how to deal with it. So they cut that program. Well, that program didn't cost hardly anything. It didn't cost $1 billion, which means it didn't cost 1% of what they were about to give and will eventually give Mr. Elon Musk. Okay, you know how you describe a society that behaves this way? Sick, broken, completely out of control. That's what we have. I walk through the streets of New York. I often have to step over people sleeping on the streets of New York. I step over the people that are sleeping in order to go into a restaurant where I have to spend $200 per person for my dinner. You understand? Rich and poor all over one another. Everybody knows. If I'm going to describe the American economy, should I describe it in terms of syphilis? Should I describe it in terms of inequality? It's a disaster. That has to go and sit there right next to the unemployment statistic. Let me give you one more example, and then I'll show you where it leads. Capitalism is an unstable system. It always has been. Here in the United States, we have a governmental, quasi-governmental agency called the National Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER. And they keep track of business cycles. So we know that wherever capitalism settles in, it has a business downturn on average every 4 to 7 years. Sometimes it takes a bit longer, sometimes a bit short. Some of these downturns are short and shallow. Some of them are long and deep. Okay. In this new century, the 21st century, we have had 3 major economic downturns. The dot-com crash early in 2000, the subprime mortgage crash in 2008 and 9, and the so-called COVID-19 crash in 2020. Roughly 21 years, roughly 3 crashes. That's one about every 7 years, right on time. To deal with these crashes has been difficult. Why? Because 2 out of the 3 of them, the 2008 crash and the 2020 crash, were among the 3 worst crashes capitalism has ever had. They were smaller only to the crash of the 1930s, the so-called Great Depression from 1929 to 1940. Okay, so we've had 2 terrible and 1 not so terrible crash. What did the United States government do? The United States government panicked because it saw correctly for a few weeks the risk that the whole thing would crash. And by whole thing crash, let me be very clear. We're talking about a situation where your ability to function wouldn't be all that much better than the ability of people in the Gaza Strip to function real well these days, or in Ukraine. You couldn't get milk for your child. You couldn't get bread for your table. You'd have a broken economy. Terrified because that was so close. And I was living and working here in New York City, where I am now, at all that time, all three of those crashes I went through here. And let me assure you that the people who run the American system were terrified. I'm sorry about this.
No worries, we'll cut it out.
Okay. So one of the things these geniuses who were in charge did, because that's all they learned in schools, what I learned, we drove down the interest rate in the United States. We reduced interest rate. You know this because this happened in Europe also. Interest rates went all the way down to zero, and for various periods of time, below zero. Below zero means that the government prints money and lends it to you at a negative interest rate, which means it lends you $100 or 100 kroner or 100 Deutschmark or 100 euros on condition that a year from now, you give them back 98 of them. In other words, you win by borrowing. Okay. That's an extreme situation, not supposed to happen. As a result of doing that for the last 20 years, every capitalist enterprise in Europe and here in the United States that had any kind of economic problem, it couldn't sell its product, it couldn't find the best technology, it was short of skilled work, whatever the problem was, the quickest, easiest, cheapest way to solve the problem was to go and borrow the limitless free money that the governments across Europe and North America were pumping out to them. The result is that in both the United States and Europe today, we have levels of debt that the world has never seen. Corporate debt in America is so severe that roughly 20% of American corporations are called, and we have this name in the United States, I don't know if you have that in Europe yet, but you will, zombie corporations. A zombie corporation is a company that doesn't make enough profit to pay off the interest cost on its loans. So it has to borrow the money to pay off interest, which of course means that it'll have more interest to pay on the new money it borrowed to pay and therefore is getting itself deeper and deep. We don't know what to do with this. We have no idea what this means. We have no historical experience to use as a basis to say, well, what would be the problem if we have a normal economic downturn and we have this level of corporate debt? The United States as a government has higher corporate debt than it ever did. And the United States already was the largest debtor country in the world. No other country owes as much money to the rest of the world as we do. And you know who the two biggest creditor countries are? Who are the two biggest countries that are creditors of the debtor United States? The People's Republic of China is one, and Japan is the other. Economically speaking, Japan is what we call a basket case. This is an economy in a level of difficulty that makes our problems look light. But not the People's Republic of China. Its economic system is so good, so basically well functioning these days, that when you hear Americans talk about what they wish were true about their own economy, they need to talk down the Chinese economy because it does so much better than them. Let me give you a simple example. Over the last 30 years, we have this statistics in economics. We like to play with statistics. It's a game. And one of the most popular is called the gross domestic product, GDP. And it's a crude, it's very crude, but it's a crude measure of the output of goods and services per year, calendar year, 12 months. Okay. How well you're doing, one measure, not the only one, but one measure, is how fast is your GDP growing? At what rate are you expanding your output? For most of the last 30 years, the average rate of growth of the United States GDP has been between 1.5% and 2% per year. Over that same period, the average rate of growth of the Chinese GDP has been between 6% and 9%. That conversation has no need to go any further. They have outperformed the United States for 30 years, which is why they are the huge, powerful economy in the world today. Let me rattle it off. They are the #1 ship company in the world. They produce ships that carry grain or oil or around the world. They're #1 producer of electric cars, and they're #1 exporter of vehicles. These are the most important industries in modern capitalism, and they're the dominant country. The crazy Europeans, and I mean you too.
Yes.
You too. I told you about my own European.
Yeah.
So I speak of myself as well. The crazy Europeans decided in an act of self-destruction that the historians will marvel at to apply sanctions to Russia over the invasion of Ukraine. So Russia couldn't sell oil and gas to Europe. To make sure they couldn't do it, some mysterious people blew up a pipeline in the North Sea. Charming, real sophisticated politics. Anyway, the Russians said, we're an economy that's dependent on oil and gas, which they are. We have to find someone else to buy it. They were selling it to Germany at a ridiculous price, which is why Germany had a Wirtschaftswunder. No Wirtschaft, no Wunder. They got cheap energy. That's the Wunder, It had nothing to do with them. Nothing. But it's good for self-delusional, German ideology, but that's another issue. So the Russians discovered they could sell oil and gas to the Chinese. But the Chinese then said, okay, well, what are we going to sell you in exchange? We don't want to pay you money. We'll give you something we produce. The Russians said, fine, cars. Because we're going to punish the Europeans. We're not going to buy their cars anymore. Not their Opels, not their Simcas, not their Peugeot, not their nothing. Not their Volkswagen, nothing. We're going to buy Chinese cars. Great, said the Chinese, who therefore became the world's #1 automobile exporter, realizing economies of gains that will guarantee the profit of automobile to the Chinese for the indefinite future, and will make it very difficult for one part of the world's automobile industry to survive. And you know what part that is? Europe's.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Just for you to understand, there's a saying in the United States which applies to the Europeans. You have just shown unbelievable marksmanship in the manner in which you shot yourself in the foot. What are you doing? For those of us over here in the United States, we look at the Europeans and we, what? What are you doing? Why would you do this? This is crazy. You know, somewhere you do, that you're caught between the Chinese empire rising and the American empire going down. You better be very careful, because you have attached yourself to a sinking ship. Very, very bad idea. And the worst of it, there's no loyalty here. If you imagine that American policy understands and appreciates Europe, then you're not paying attention. They don't. They never did. The woman who arranged the disaster of Ukraine is famous here for having said, quote unquote, fuck the Europeans, because she was angry that they were slowing down her brilliant plan to bring Ukraine into NATO. We see what an extraordinarily brilliant move that was.
Yes, and it's another example is there was the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in 22.
Yeah,
and they had earmarked 369 billion, I believe, for climate and energy companies. Yes. And that would have had a very big or negative impact on the European industry.
Yes.
And the European industries did not know or care, or politicians did not speak up in Europe before after the fact. And
yes.
And there was no negotiation or any attempt to say to the Europeans, hey, let's talk about how this is going to affect your industry. So I also think that's a important example.
They have since said that was an oversight, that they are eager to sit down with the Europeans to discuss it. They want to discuss with you how you can be a cushion for the United States as it has growing economic difficulties. They want the Europeans to absorb those difficulties. So if there has to be a long, bitter, costly war with Russia, first they tell the Europeans, don't worry, the ruble will collapse. The Russians will come to their knees. This is nothing. I don't know if you remember. It's not that long ago, 2 years. February of 2022. None of that happened. You were told stories. The United States would fund the war. It's not doing that anymore. Europeans just passed $38 billion. The United States has just made the decision not to give them $38 billion. You who are bearing the costs of the war in the sanctions and the counter-sanctions, you're funding the war that disproportionately hurts you. Now, the only way you could do that, the only way the United States could enjoy that, is by having European political leaders so desperate for American support that they will go along with anything. They will have a meeting of German steelmakers or Italian furniture makers or French luxury goods producers screaming about what's happening. They'll have them in the Pitti Palace in Florence or in the Élysée Palace in France or wherever they do this in Germany. And those politicians will sit there being screamed at by their own people, and they will defend the United States. So the question here in this country is, why are they doing that? And here is the answer, just so you know. And please correct me, because I'd be glad to help correct the American perception. Here's the perception. Europe is falling apart. What held the EU together is Germany, and Germany can't do it anymore. And the reason Germany could do it was all about cheap energy, and they're never going to get that back. So now the question is, what happens? And the fear in every European, here we go now, here's the answer. The fear in every European country is that they will all become what Great Britain already is: a lapdog, a junior partner, the one who is told by Washington what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and then when to shut up about doing it. And the fear in Europe is no one dares violate that rule, because what the United States will do will be to go after them and offer them all kinds of benefits that they will take away from another European country. And each of the European countries knows exactly what's going on, but cannot dare take the chance of breaking away.
So,
last thing, every 3 months, one of your politicians, a horrible joke of a person, but one who has a real political base, we call him here in this country Emmanuel Macaroon. President Macaroon every 3 months says something because he has to. He has got the popularity in France of, I don't know, I can't think of anyone disliked more. My family is part French, and my family is not very political. But when the name Macron comes across the dinner table at the restaurant, there's a general collection of jokes about the limited sexual capacity of Mr. Macron and everything else they can think of. And everybody laughs, even the people who don't find it funny. Because laughing at that clown, by the way, Monsieur le Clown in French, the clown is de rigueur, but still he has to say something. Well, we don't always have to do what the Americans say. Oh, how daring. By the way, he does exactly like the others. It's not real, it's just performance. But the job of the European politician looks in the United States to be the willing partner in the subordination of Europe to play a completely secondary role in the next century's struggle between the United States and its allies on the one hand, the G7, and the Chinese and their allies, the BRICS. And it is strange to watch the Europeans willingly do that, since it's not a good bet. You are attaching yourself to the wrong horse in a horse race. And then the question becomes, could the European masses go along with this? And this may now be the consensus that surprises you. No, say the people here in New York City that I meet with. The European masses are going to take Europe the other way. And those European leaders could be leaders of the left, or they could be leaders of the right. They could be Mélenchon from France or Viktor Orban from Hungary. But the mass of the people are at a certain point going to say in the Italian language, basta, no more of this.
So I'd like to bring in a striking contrast.
Good.
And that is and I'd like you to comment on this thing I told you a bit earlier here, but I'm going to tell it again for the audience, that historically Denmark has been a pretty neutral country, at least as far as goes as having foreign troops on its soil, and it was a conditionality to be part of NATO that there should be no nukes and no foreign bases and no pre-positioned foreign troops on Danish soil. And then in December last year, 2003, it was announced, the public was informed that negotiations of a new defense agreement had already been underway for years with the Americans, and that now, soon, in maybe 2024, it will be finalized, and which means that there will now be American troops on Danish soil, and this is non-negotiable for 10 years. And Mette Frederiksen at this conference said, I quote, "There cannot be as much as a piece of paper between Denmark and the United States." So with your knowledge of both the United States, but also of other European countries, how do you react to this?
I will tell you my reaction. It's based on everything we think and discuss over here. It is not based on any inside knowledge. I do not have any inside knowledge that I could offer, and I wouldn't if I did, because that could get me into trouble, and I don't want to have any trouble at all. Here's my guess, that's all this is. Here's my guess. That in a quiet way, 5 years ago, in some lovely castle overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, a group of leading center-right politicians from Denmark got together for a conference. It was officially listed as a conference to discuss the export of Danish butter to India or something. But it was actually about a meeting between those political forces and the United States State Department and the United States military. And they were all there. And my guess is the basic message went like this: we in the United States have determined that we made a mistake when Kissinger and Nixon went to China and opened up the Chinese relationship, recognized China, worked with China to bring it into the World Trade Organization by the end of the century. We believed that this would make China be a responsible member of the global community, shit like this. And, but it's important to say these things because all the right people nod when you say those things as if they even heard them. But we were wrong. It turns out the Chinese have their own idea about what it is they want to do and what their role in the world can be. It turns out they don't agree with our idea of what their role should be, which is a junior partner for us. So we have changed our plan. We are now going to concentrate on slowing, stopping, reversing what the Chinese are doing economically. And you could see the first really loud signs of it under Obama, but even more so under Trump. If you will remember 2016, 17, these were years when the President of the United States declared a tariff war on China, a trade war with China, and so forth. It was a time when the United States arrested executives, the daughter of the head of the Huawei Corporation, which is an international telecommunications giant, company that makes computer chips for use in telephones and all of that. A huge, important company. And so they said to the Danish right-wingers, we are going to now go to economic war with the Chinese. It's going to last a long time. Remember, I'm talking to you now about 2014, 2015, around that time. So it's already been 10 years that this conversation has been the dominant one. And the message we have for you, you great leaders of, what country is it again? Oh, yeah, Denmark. The message we have for you leaders is this. Because the two dominant players are the United States and China, it's going to be difficult for you in Denmark, or for that matter, for you in Spain, or you in Greece, or you in Sweden, or anywhere else. But we have a plan, and we will prevail. And you will be safe if and to the degree you cooperate with us. We do not want to be in the position that some of you are willing to cooperate and others of you are hesitant. For example, some of you have very quaint laws about not allowing troops of other countries to have a base on your soil. We can't have that. In a world of changing drone technology, we need to be able to have bases everywhere. We are busy, we Americans, in putting a whole layer of bases across Africa, North Africa, South Africa, East, West, all of which is true, by the way, all of which is true. So here's our message to you in Denmark. if you play ball with us, help us maintain this powerful defense, then we will protect you. We will protect you not just against the Chinese who have their issues with you, because let us assure you, if it hasn't already happened, it will soon. You will be visited by the BYD Corporation. They will say that they wish to import BYD automobiles from China into Copenhagen. And I have one piece of news for you, in case you're wondering. Yes, those cars will be cheaper than Western European cars. And yes, they will be better. And yes, your citizens will want to buy them. And no, you won't let them. And that will be difficult for you. But don't you worry, we will be your allies. We will find ways to enable you to play the role you should. But we are prepared, just so you know. Of course, we're not worried about Denmark, but we're worried about Netherlands, or I don't know, maybe Belgium, or maybe Monaco, or some other. Whoa, we are prepared that there will be some Europeans who don't want to play this game with us. But they will be our enemies, and they will not last long. So you have a choice, Mr. and Mrs. Danish politician. You can be the loyal servants of the United States, or you can be swallowed up and destroyed in the competition between the United States and China. But you have no other choice. Because the great fear in the United States, apropos Europe, is precisely that you do have another choice, and the terrible fear that you will take it. And the other choice is to actually do what the greatest Europeans have been fantasizing about for the last half century, which is to have Europe unifiée, a Europe that is its own economic reality. You have a population that's bigger than the United States, highly disciplined in terms of industrial work, capable of doing high-tech work of all kinds. Everybody knows that it was the Finns and the Swedes who made modern telephone technology possible, blah, 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 blah. We know that you can do this. My mother swore to me that the best furniture in the world was Danish modern. And we had in our kitchen Danish modern because my mother just loved it, the simple lines and the beautiful teak wood and all the rest of it. But that's the fear, and that's it. And they want in power politicians that are loyal servants. And you will be treated the way loyal servants are, which is when things are going good, you'll get a few extra pieces of meat. And when things are not going so well, they'll forget who you were. And you will have nothing because you didn't side up with the winning side and you're being let go by the losers. This is the worst disaster that can come to you. And your leaders are playing with that. And the fact that they can't talk to you about it, that these things have to be done in secret, is a good piece of evidence that they know exactly what they're doing, and they could not take the chance to make it a public issue, to have a referendum, to honor their own history by saying, well, come up with some bullshit about why you ought to do this. You know, come up with a story that the Russian gas pipeline was intended to secretly go under Copenhagen and blow up in the middle of the Tivoli Garden or something like this, you know, to tell you a story. They didn't even bother. They had to do it in secret because otherwise it was too risky. You might vote like the Dutch did a while back, not to go along with Maastricht or something else in the European story along the way. But you are at a very, very dangerous crossroad. We know it here, and we're not in as bad danger as you are.
Well, I would thank you very much for your perspective on this. It's a bit bleak, but I think it's good that we talk about this. And
well, you know, if you would like a much more pleasant, I can arrange for a set of clips from tonight's mainstream media news across the televisions, and you will there feel much more comfortable, much more relaxed. Everything is in order. You know, if you have a moment, just because it's so important, forget economics for a minute. Just think like a normal, intelligent person. Okay? I'm an American. I'm married. I'm married to a psychotherapist. I have 2 children. I live in New York City. You see my books behind me, like I see the books behind. I mean, I'm a professor. I look like a professor. I mean, you know, come on. It's obvious, right? So here's what I have, though. I live in a country in which half of our people, half, are seriously attracted by politicians who believe in white supremacy. That issue, which we thought in this racially divided country we had put behind us, we never did. I don't remember whether Gunnar Myrdal was Danish or whether he was Swedish. I don't remember.
It sounds Swedish.
Yeah, he wrote a wonderful book about the racial problem in the United States. Really, one of the great books was written by Myrdal. But in any case, he
was Swedish. Yeah.
Swedish. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I would have preferred to pick a Danish person. But
that's okay. I'm half Swedish.
Good. Okay. I'm dealing with in a country which made a man like Donald Trump president. And at this point, as I speak to you, is probably, if the election were today, would make him president again. Right?
Mm.
This is a man who has been convicted of rape. The man has been convicted of massive financial fraud. His level of lying and being caught in the lie really makes him outstanding among people who really compete for this honor. It doesn't matter. You know what that means? It means that there are people so upset, so disturbed by what's going on, that they want to support someone. They don't care who it is, who's different, who really is. Joe Biden is the same old American elite political class. Donald Trump is Mr. Vulgar different. And that's all it is. But that's not a sign of a country doing well.
Oh.
When I told you at the beginning we have 3% unemployment, you know what it was? If I were to explain this into a working class audience, American capitalism said to the working class, you're going to be 10% unemployed. We're willing to bring it down to 3%, but only if we can pay you next to nothing. Okay, said the working class, next to nothing is better than unemployed. So we now pay millions of people impossible wages and salaries. They cannot live. Harvard University, where I went, has a joint center on housing. It's the best source of information about the housing situation in the United States. They issue an annual report. You can find it on the internet. Joint Center on Housing, Harvard University. The new one, covering the year 2024, begins with this statistic. Over half the renters in the United States, over half the people who rent, are spending more on their rent than they can afford. In other words, they figure out what percentage of your income you need to spend on your rent for your apartment or your house. We used to have more people owning their own home, but the money isn't there. So large corporations have bought up hundreds of thousands of homes, and they rent the whole house to a family instead of an apartment. Very common now in the United States. Used to be very rare. But so they measure, and so I can tell you that more than 50% of Americans rent, and more than 50% of those are spending more than 25%, more or less, of their income on rent, which means they're unable to eat enough or clothe enough, or they go without medical care because, you know, we don't have a national health system the way the Europeans do. This is a society that is full of people that are walking around miserable. They're miserable people. They're unhappy in their lives. They're unhappy with their children, with their husband, with their wife, with their parents. It's a society desperate to figure out what to do and about to vote for Donald Trump. You know, I do. You know, let me tell you about Donald Trump. They listen, very polite. I know these people, they're friends. And they see that I'm agitated about it. And they say to me, you know, don't take this, Rick. You know, we agree with you about it. Capitalism sucks. And then when they finish, they say, what? I'm voting for Trump. Because Trump is going to change things. You know,
yeah.
You don't need an economy. The famous song by Bob Dylan. You do not need a weatherman to tell which way the wind blows. You do not need an economist. Not really. You just have to take a look. You cannot have a modern society like the United States with Elon Musk demanding a $56 billion personal payout for 1 year's activity, while half the population is desperate about its rent for the next month. I mean, this is so crazy. Even the people here now understand it's crazy. The biggest response to me is, it's crazy. And I cannot disagree. But let me make my last point once again. The Danish people, you, my European friends and neighbors, meine Freunde in Deutschland, et tous mes amis en France, il me faut dire, I have to say, do not make a mistake that you and your children and your grandchildren will regret. The French is charming for this. L'heure de l'empire est passée. The hour of the empire is gone. The British Empire came and went. The American Empire came and is now going. Do not be crazy and associate yourself with that process in the way that you have. You were far better off making wonderful dairy products for a dying British Empire than you are going to be letting American soldiers walk around your military bases and make you a target. And if they promise you that militarily they have this situation under control, then let me ask you, please. It's crystal clear here in the United States who is winning the war in Ukraine and who's losing it. I don't know what they're telling you over there, but let me tell you what they're telling me here in New York. The United States losing, Russia winning on the ground, foot by foot. Horrible for Ukraine. It will take them generations to get over this. All the promises about a collapsed Russia, wrong. All the promises about a collapsed ruble, wrong. What Mr. Putin did is very similar to what Franklin Roosevelt did in the United States. He took the United States of the Depression, the 1930s, and used World War II to re-employ and rebuild American capitalism. And Mr. Putin has used Ukraine to do the same thing for Russia. It should have come as a surprise to nobody. Very strange times we live in.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure, and I hope I didn't mean it to be bleak.
I think it's wonderful, and when we are in the gutter and we're looking up towards the stars, at least in this new future, we will see rocket ships with Tesla cars on their way to Mars.
Yes, and he'll be waving his porte-monnaie with all the money that he has gathered into it. I thought you were going to say when you're down, everything looks up. You know, where else can you go? You can only go up. You're down as far as it goes. Yeah. I think we are at a position like that. I'm very optimistic about the United States. Very optimistic. I think that there are huge changes coming here. And the basic reason I hinted at with you before, the right wing is now taking power in many parts of the world, but it has no program. It has no solution for the economic problems it has inherited. And that I would say the same thing to my socialist friends. One of the reasons, as you put it yourself, the Socialist Party of France, or the Syriza in Greece, or any of the other left-wing, or Mélenchon, even in France, they don't have the program they need to have to be the new direction. So if they were to take power tomorrow, I would be telling them, you are in terrible problem. You're going to inherit a disaster. You don't have a solution. I'm not a right-winger, so I don't meet with them. But if I did, I would say to them, very nice. But you know, hating immigrants is not a solution for anything. You can do that for all day long. Take all those Syrians and put them back in Syria if you want, but it's not going to solve your problems. How are you going to solve your problems? You better do something, because time is not on your side anymore. I think Europeans are in a position where you might surprise yourselves as you figure this out.
Thank you.
If you ever want to have a conversation to take this forward, let me know. It'd be my pleasure.
I would love to. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. and to meet you and to hear your perspective, and especially bounce a couple of issues around. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope to speak to you again sometime.
Good. And let me tell you, Martin Haumann, that we now have all across the United States an army of podcasters and bloggers, so that now there is a universe for people like me to speak to. It is just, I do my own radio and television program here in the United States. We go out to 50 million people. It's called Economic Update. It's a weekly program. You can get it on YouTube and all that easily.
I'll be sure to link to it.
But I want to commend you, because that's the way people in Denmark are going to be able to learn about all these things, is having people like you talk to. It's the new public space.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's very important right now that we make these connections across different borders, and we get to see what's actually going on, and because it feels the informational space is very insulated, and sometimes I talk to people in Denmark, and it feels like when there's, for example, there's an American election, it feels like it's almost a Danish election. That's how important it is, and how much space it takes up in our conversation and in our thoughts in our daily lives. So I think it's important that we maybe start looking out a bit at what's happening in Europe,
and mechanisms like Zoom that we've been using make this really quite easy to do and almost intimate in the kind of conversation that we can have, and that's very valuable. It translates quickly and easily.
Yeah.
By the way, all this morning I had to spend time studying the American election, because the great excitement here is that what's going to determine the outcome of the election is a conspiracy between the supporters and the critics of Taylor Swift.
Taylor, oh really? Okay.
Yes. The supporters are called Swifties.
Yeah.
And she has a boyfriend who is a football player, and the whole country follows every time she and her boyfriend get together. Not in the bedroom, but I mean when they get together. And the right wing, Trump, has declared that all of this is a conspiracy, and that just before the election, Taylor Swift and her football boyfriend will announce in favor of Joe Biden. And they're angry and they're bitter. They made all this up.
I think I've come across it, but it just seems so bizarre that I didn't look into it.
Well, you're dealing with a crazy place.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Till next time.
Thank you.